I remember the night like it was burned into my mind, etched deep with the sharp edge of unease. My husband, Ethan, and I were in our quiet living room, the glow of the fireplace flickering across the walls. The world outside felt distant, muted by the howling wind rattling against the windows. Ethan and I had been together for 12 years. We had built a life, one that felt steady, familiar. He was my rock, the one who had stood by me through everything. But that night, something was different. He sat in his usual spot, cradling a steaming mug of green tea, but his posture was stiff. His gaze, usually warm and open, held something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness. It was something else. Something that sent a chill down my spine. He had been stealing glances at me all evening, like he was on the verge of saying something but couldn't find the right words. Finally, he set his mug down, took a deep breath, and cleared his throat. "Emma," he started, his voice steady but measured. "I've been thinking about something." My stomach twisted. I had heard that tone before. It was the kind people use when they're about to drop a bomb they can't take back. I forced a small smile. "Thinking about what?" Ethan hesitated, rubbing his hands together before finally looking me in the eye. "What if we tried something new in our relationship?" I blinked. "Tried something new?" I repeated, my voice laced with nervous laughter. "Like what? A vacation? Learning to ski? A cooking class?" I threw in a playful grin, hoping he would laugh and tell me I was overreacting. But he didn't. His lips pressed into a thin line, and he shook his head. "No," he said carefully. "I mean, what if we explored being with other people?" The room fell into a suffocating silence. I stared at him, waiting for a laugh, for him to tell me it was some kind of joke. But the seriousness in his expression told me otherwise. "Ethan," I said, my throat suddenly dry. "Are you serious?" He nodded. "I've been reading about it. Some couples say it helps them reconnect, strengthens their bond." Strengthens their bond? My heart clenched. Was he saying we were broken? That he wasn't happy? My stomach twisted as I gripped the blanket draped over my lap. This isn't you. Where is this coming from?" Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It's not about not being enough for each other," he said softly. "I just think maybe we should be open to the possibility. To see if we're missing something." I stiffened. "Missing? Ethan, we've spent over a decade together. We've built a home, a life. And now you're telling me you want to see if something's missing?" He sighed. "Not see, just consider. I've already thought of someone." A cold wave of dread settled in my chest. "You've what?" His voice was gentle, as if trying to soften the blow. "It's just an idea. Nothing set in stone. Someone I trust. Someone open-minded." I swallowed hard. I already knew I wasn't going to like what came next. "His name is Ryan. We go to the same gym." I felt my stomach drop. Ryan. I barely knew him. I had heard his name in passing, just some guy Ethan mentioned when talking about his workouts. And now, suddenly, my husband had thought of him in this way. I felt sick. Ethan continued, his voice slow and deliberate. "He's a great guy, really understanding, and he knows this is just a thought. Nothing has to happen." I stood up abruptly, the weight of his words crashing down on me. "I can't believe this," I whispered, shaking my head. "Do you even hear yourself? This is insane. It's humiliating." Ethan stood too, reaching toward me, but I stepped back. His expression softened. "Emma, please. I'm not trying to hurt you. I just want us to think about it." Think? The only thing I could think about was how absurd this entire conversation was. Without another word, I turned and walked away, my heart pounding as I locked myself in the bedroom. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Ethan's words echoing in my mind, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to face. Was this the beginning of the end? Or had something already ended, without me even realizing it? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, Ethan's words echoed in my head like a haunting melody I couldn't turn off. What if we explored being with other people? The words felt foreign, wrong, like they didn't belong to the man I had married. I tried to convince myself that it was just a phase, a fleeting curiosity he'd let go of once he saw how much it had shaken me. But deep down, I knew better. Morning came, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. I found Ethan in the kitchen, standing by the stove, pouring himself a cup of coffee like it was just another day. Like he hadn't just cracked open our entire marriage the night before. I wanted to ignore him, to act like his words hadn't ripped something inside me. But the silence between us was unbearable. "Did you sleep?" I asked, my voice stiff. He turned slightly, giving me a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not really." I nodded, gripping the edge of the counter to keep my hands from shaking. I couldn't either. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint dripping of the coffee maker and the occasional clink of his spoon against the ceramic mug. Then, as if nothing had happened, Ethan said, "I invited Ryan over for dinner." My body went cold. "You what?" He took a sip of his coffee, his expression unreadable. "I thought it would be good for you to meet him." "You thought—" I let out a sharp breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Ethan, do you even hear yourself? You spring this whole idea on me, and now you're bringing him into our home?" He set his mug down and finally met my gaze. "Emma, I'm not forcing anything. I just think it's important that you meet him before shutting this down completely." I stared at him, disbelief flooding through me. Shutting this down? Did he think I just needed a little convincing? That if I met Ryan, I'd suddenly see whatever Ethan saw in this? I crossed my arms. "And did you tell Ryan why he's coming over?" Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch it. "I told him we wanted to have dinner. That's it," he admitted. "He doesn't know everything yet. I thought we could just see how it feels." "See how it feels?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Ethan, I don't need to see anything. I already know how I feel." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he leaned against the counter, watching me carefully. "Just one dinner, Emma," he said softly. "No pressure, no decisions, just a conversation." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how unfair this was, how absurd it all sounded. But what stopped me was the way he looked at me, like he expected me to refuse, like he knew I would. And suddenly, I realized something that sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just about Ryan. Ethan was testing me, and that terrified me more than anything. The hours leading up to dinner felt like an eternity. I tried to distract myself, folded laundry, scrolled through my phone, even cleaned the kitchen counters twice. But nothing could quiet the storm brewing inside me. Ethan, on the other hand, acted like it was just another normal day. He went about setting the table, humming under his breath, as if tonight was nothing more than a casual get-together with an old friend. But it wasn't. It was a test. And whether I liked it or not, I was being dragged into it. By the time the doorbell rang, my nerves were stretched so thin I thought I might snap. I took a deep breath, smoothed my sweater, and forced my feet toward the door. When I opened it, I finally laid eyes on him. Ryan. Tall. Broad shoulders. A presence that filled the space without even trying. He wasn't just attractive. He was the kind of person who radiated effortless confidence. The kind that made you aware of him even before he spoke. "Hey," You must be Emma, Ryan said with an easy smile, extending his hand. His grip was firm but not overpowering, his touch lingering just a second too long. Nice to meet you, I said, keeping my tone polite, controlled. Ethan appeared beside me, clapping Ryan on the back like they were old friends. Come in, man. Make yourself at home. I stepped aside as Ryan entered, bringing with him an energy I couldn't quite put my finger on. As he walked past, I caught a faint whiff of cologne, something woodsy, unfamiliar. It wasn't unpleasant, which somehow made it worse. Dinner started off fine, normal even. Ryan was charming, effortlessly funny, and knew exactly how to carry a conversation. He asked about my work, my hobbies, the places I wanted to travel. Small talk, but laced with something deeper. Something intentional. And the entire time I could feel Ethan watching. Studying me. Studying us. It was unnerving, like I was some kind of experiment, and I hated it. And yet, there was something about Ryan that was disarming. He had a way of making people comfortable, like he already knew how to fit into any space he entered. It was unsettling, but also intriguing. At one point, I caught him watching me, just a second too long, just enough for it to mean something. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes before he looked away, continuing the conversation like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just felt something shift. And Ethan noticed. I could tell by the way his grip tightened around his wine glass. By the way he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. But he didn't say a word. Not yet. The tension was thick enough to choke on. I should have hated every second of this dinner. I wanted to hate it. But the worst part? I didn't. And that terrified me most of all. By the time dinner was over, I felt like I had just walked a tightrope blindfolded. The conversation had flowed easily, too easily. Ryan had a way of making things feel casual, effortless. But underneath it all, I could feel the undercurrents of something deeper, something I wasn't sure I wanted to acknowledge. Ethan cleared the plates, moving with a practiced ease, while Ryan leaned back in his chair, watching me with that same unreadable expression. You okay? He asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I forced a small smile. Why wouldn't I be? Ryan studied me for a moment, then tilted his head. I don't know. You just seem conflicted. I stiffened slightly. I'm fine. But I wasn't. And the fact that Ryan could see through me so easily made my stomach twist. Ethan returned with a fresh bottle of wine, pouring another glass for each of us. So, he said, sitting down and folding his hands together. What do you think? I blinked. What? Ethan nodded toward Ryan. Now that you've met him, what do you think? I felt my pulse quicken. Ryan looked at me expectantly, waiting for an answer. This was it. The moment I was being cornered into. The moment Ethan wanted to happen. My fingers tightened around my glass. I think, I started slowly, carefully, that he's very easy to talk to. Ethan smirked slightly but said nothing. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed amused. That's a polite way of saying you don't trust me yet. I don't know you, I countered, my voice steady. Ryan chuckled, swirling his wine. Fair enough. Then, before I could stop myself, I turned to Ethan. Why are you doing this? Ethan raised a brow. Doing what? I gestured between him and Ryan. This whole thing. What are you expecting to happen? Ethan didn't flinch. I just want you to be open to the idea, Emma. That's all. I stared at him, searching for any sign of doubt, any hesitation. But there was none. He was completely, utterly serious. Ryan watched our exchange with quiet interest, but he didn't interfere. Not yet. Then Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. Are you happy? The question landed like a punch to the gut. I swallowed hard. What? Are you happy? He repeated. With us? With everything? I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out, because the truth was, I didn't know how to respond. Ryan tilted his head slightly, as if he already knew. Ethan's gaze never wavered. He was waiting, testing me. And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't know if I had the right answer. Ethan's question lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Are you happy? I wanted to say yes. I should have said yes. But the hesitation in my silence said more than words ever could. I could feel Ryan's eyes on me, waiting, assessing. Ethan, too, watching me with the patience of someone who already knew the answer but wanted to hear me admit it. I forced myself to take a slow sip of wine, trying to buy time. Why are you asking me this now? I finally said. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling softly. Because I think you've been pretending, Emma, and I don't want us to pretend anymore. His words hit harder than I expected. Pretending? Was that what I had been doing all these years? I shook my head. This is insane, I muttered. We have a good life, Ethan. We don't need to go looking for whatever this is. Ethan smiled, but there was something knowing behind it. You keep saying that, but I think you're scared to admit that maybe, just maybe, you want more. I clenched my jaw. More? I scoffed. What, Ethan? What more do I need? His gaze flickered toward Ryan, and in that moment, I knew exactly what he was implying. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I can't do this. Ryan finally spoke. Emma, no one's forcing you to do anything. His voice was calm, level, too level. But I think Ethan's right about one thing. I turned to him sharply. And what's that? Ryan leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. That maybe you're curious. My breath hitched. He was playing a dangerous game, and he knew it. I stared at him, my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to argue, to deny it, to shut this entire conversation down. But the problem was, a part of me was curious, and that terrified me. I turned to Ethan, my voice barely above a whisper. Is this what you wanted? For me to question everything? Ethan studied me for a long moment before answering. I just wanted you to be honest with yourself. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking at my sides. I hated this. I hated how calculated this felt. I hated how much of myself I was losing in this moment. But most of all, I hated that Ethan might be right. And that scared me more than anything. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind tangled in thoughts I didn't want to have. Ethan's words still echoed in my head. Are you happy? Maybe you're curious. I hated how those words crawled under my skin, planting seeds of doubt where there had been none before. And worse, I hated that they had taken root. The next morning, I moved through my routine like a ghost, made coffee, avoided Ethan's gaze, checked my phone out of habit, and there it was, a message. Ryan. Hey, thanks again for dinner. It was nice getting to know you. A simple message. Harmless. So why did it feel anything but? I hesitated before typing back. Me. Thanks, Ryan. It was nice meeting you too. I hit send, telling myself it was just politeness, that it didn't mean anything. But less than a minute later, another message popped up. Ryan. If you ever want to talk, no pressure. I swallowed hard. No pressure. The same words Ethan had used. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the keyboard. I should ignore it. I needed to ignore it. Instead, I typed, me. Appreciate that. I set my phone down like it was burning me. I wasn't doing anything wrong, right? I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. But deep down, I knew. Something had already begun. Ethan was sitting on the couch when I got home, scrolling through his phone like he had been waiting for me. I hesitated in the doorway. "Ryan texted me," I said finally. Ethan didn't look surprised. "What did he say?" I crossed my arms. "Just that he had a nice time at dinner. That if I ever wanted to talk, I could." Ethan set his phone down and met my gaze. "And how did that make you feel?" I let out a dry laugh. "Are you analyzing me now?" Ethan shrugged. "I'm just curious." I clenched my jaw. "It made me feel, I don't know." Ethan studied me for a moment, then leaned forward. "I think you do know." I looked away, frustration bubbling inside me. "Why are you pushing this?" "I'm not pushing," he said calmly. "I just want you to stop lying to yourself." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died on my tongue. Because he was right. I had spent the past 24 hours trying to convince myself that I wasn't curious. But the truth was, I was. And that scared me more than anything. The message sat in my phone, burning a hole through my resolve. "If you ever want to talk, no pressure." It was simple, harmless. Nothing I should feel guilty about. So why did I keep reading it over and over? I told myself it was just politeness. Ryan was just being friendly. But a part of me knew better. There was an unspoken invitation beneath his words. And worse, a part of me was tempted to accept it. The next few days passed in a blur of avoidance. I kept my distance from Ethan, unsure if I was angry at him or at myself. Every time I looked at him, I felt like he was seeing something in me that I wasn't ready to admit. I didn't text Ryan back, but I also didn't delete the message. And that was my first mistake. It was a quiet afternoon when my phone buzzed again. "Ryan, hope you're having a good day. Just wanted to check in." I stared at the message for far too long. I shouldn't reply. There was no reason to. And yet, me. "Hey, yeah, just a busy day. Hope yours is good too." It was neutral, safe. It meant nothing. At least, that's what I told myself. Ryan's response came quickly. "Ryan, busy is good. Keeps the mind from wandering." I frowned at the words, shifting uncomfortably. Was that a subtle dig? A test? Or was I just overthinking everything? Me. Yeah, something like that. I should have ended the conversation there. But instead, I watched as 3 little dots appeared. Then his next message came through. "Ryan, maybe we should grab coffee sometime." No expectations, just a conversation. My heart pounded. There it was, the invitation. I read the message 3 times before locking my phone and shoving it into my pocket. My pulse was racing, and I hated it. It was just coffee. Just a conversation. Then why did it feel like something much more dangerous? That night, Ethan noticed. He always noticed. We were in bed, the glow of the bedside lamp casting soft shadows across the room. He was reading, but I knew he wasn't really focused on the book. I was staring at the ceiling, my mind tangled in thoughts I didn't want to acknowledge. Then, without looking up, Ethan spoke. "You've been thinking about him." I stiffened. "What?" Ethan finally set his book down, turning his head toward me. "Ryan," he said simply. "You've been thinking about him." I swallowed hard. That's not..." Ethan smiled slightly, but it wasn't amusement. It was understanding, and that terrified me more than anything. "It's okay," he said. I frowned. "No, it's not okay, Ethan. This whole thing, this experiment of yours, it's messing with my head." Ethan studied me, his expression unreadable. "What are you afraid of, Emma?" I let out a sharp laugh. "Are you serious?" I'm afraid that everything we built is coming apart, that I'm changing in ways I don't understand. Ethan's gaze darkened. Or are you afraid that you like it? The air between us was thick with tension. I didn't answer, because I didn't know how. And my silence said everything. Ethan's words hung between us, thick with meaning. Or are you afraid that you like it? I wanted to snap at him, to tell him he was wrong, that I wasn't enjoying this, that I wasn't feeling something I shouldn't. But the lie was already dissolving before I could even form it. Because deep down, I was afraid. Afraid of the thoughts creeping into my mind when I least expected them. Afraid of the way my heart raced when I saw Ryan's name on my phone. Afraid of the fact that, for the first time in my marriage, I felt uncertain. And Ethan knew. He saw it. He had seen it before I had. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket up around me like it could somehow shield me from this conversation. I don't want to talk about this, I muttered. Ethan let out a soft exhale, as if he had expected that answer. He didn't push. That was almost worse. The next morning, I avoided Ethan. He had already left for work by the time I got out of bed, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. That didn't last long, because my phone was sitting on the nightstand, waiting for me, and I already knew what I would find. I reached for it hesitantly, unlocking the screen. A message. Ryan. Hey, no pressure, but if you're free today, let's grab that coffee. Up to you. My chest tightened. No pressure. The same words Ethan had used. The same words I had been telling myself over and over. I should ignore it. I should. Instead, I found myself typing. Me. Where? The response came almost instantly. Ryan. That cafe on 5th. 2 baje dopaher? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was it. The moment I could still walk away. The moment I could still put an end to this before it spiraled into something I couldn't undo. And yet, me. Okay. I set the phone down, my pulse pounding. I had just crossed a line, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. When I arrived at the cafe, Ryan was already there, sitting at a small corner table, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. He looked up as I walked in, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. Emma, he said, standing as I approached. Glad you came. I forced a tight smile, ignoring the way my stomach twisted at the warmth in his voice. It's just coffee, I said, as much to myself as to him. Ryan smirked. Of course, just coffee. I sat down, wrapping my hands around the warm cup the barista had placed in front of me. I needed something to ground me, something to hold on to. Ryan leaned back in his chair, studying me. So, how are you really feeling? I let out a breathless laugh. I don't even know anymore. Honest answer, he mused. I like that. I narrowed my eyes. Is this a game to you? Ryan shook his head, his expression suddenly serious. Not at all. I just think you're finally starting to see things clearly. I swallowed hard. And what exactly am I supposed to be seeing? Ryan's gaze was steady, unwavering. That maybe you want something different, something more. I opened my mouth to argue, to shut this down before it got worse. But the problem was, I wasn't sure I disagreed. And that scared me more than anything.